since taking credit is a form of taking, I'm writing under a pseudonym. I bought nearly all my Bitcoin at the start of 2015, and my cost basis was well under $300 a coin. I'd known about the national debt and fiat monetary systems for 30 years and knew that it was all a house of cards. And all of a sudden, I'm like, wow, there is a new way of holding scarcity that is really pure. Bitcoin is incredibly cool. It's incredibly important. It is the most important technology of our lifetimes.
And I should call you, I think, Donald, you said on the website.
Yeah, that would be fine.
Perfect.
Or Mr. Comply. I don't know. Whatever you prefer.
Then Mr. Comply, I think that's an amazing name. Then hello, Mr. Comply.
Well, hello there.
I love, by the way, your handle, like do not comply, because it goes in this whole thing of self-sovereignty, of Bitcoin helping us being more free. And you also have like an amazing pinned tweet I want to get to, because you said like Bitcoin does not fix everything, but it's fixed the foundation of everything. Maybe let's start there. Like, how does Bitcoin help us be more sovereign, be more free, be more in our being, and what can we do beyond being in Bitcoin?
Well, gosh, the topic that we're getting into, that, I mean, you're really starting with the heavy artillery. I think I would say, just to try to summarize my views about what Bitcoin creates and encourages, is the fact that most systems you've ever been part of and most games you've ever played, there's always an incentive and an ability to cheat in some way. And there just seems to be something intrinsic to Bitcoin where if you play where playing by the rules is the only way to go, because you've got such an extraordinary amount of proof of work behind it, that there's really no way to jump outside of the constraints of how the system is supposed to work. So, I think there's just something about Bitcoin that shines a light on behavior that is less than virtuous. And especially if you've been part of the Bitcoin world for many years, you just regularly see people become prominent, and then like they do something that is just totally not cool, and the community realizes it, and those people just are unceremoniously their star no longer continues to rise. Let's put it that way. So,
Yes.
So it's just a remarkable thing that I think Bitcoin is unique in rewarding virtuous behavior and spotlighting despicable behavior, or behavior that's even less than honorable. And the longer you're in it, the more you see how true that is.
Yeah. Maybe before we get into your whole Bitcoin story and how did you discover it and why it's meaningful to you in more ways, why did you choose to stay anonymous? Like, I think it's a really honorable thing to do, because basically you're putting out Bitcoin education, you're putting Bitcoin out without taking credits on your person. It's like an egoless thing to do. Why did you do that in the first place?
Well, I think what I wrote on the front page of my site actually answers that question better than I can do extemporaneously. So if you don't mind, let me read this to you. It's just a couple of paragraphs. Okay, so right now this site exists solely for the sake of hosting my Bitcoin Basics essay. Eventually, I might write about other things I care about, such as privacy, authoritarianism, and other fun topics. If and when I do, I'll revise this front page to feature my new stuff. For now, I'll just say that this site is all about giving and asks for nothing in return. I'm running it in the most principled way I know how. There are no pop-ups, no ads or affiliate links, not even any cookies. I even refuse to use Google Analytics, opting instead for the privacy respecting and cookie free Burst Statistics plugin for WordPress. And since taking credit is a form of taking, I'm writing under a pseudonym. I pay for hosting out of my own pocket and make no attempt to monetize this website or any of its writing. And then I say where you can find me on Nostr and on Twitter, and I have a page for my podcast appearances, of which this podcast will soon be added as soon as the show goes live. So anyway, I think that kind of explains my orientation and at least part of why I chose a pseudonym. And of course, the other part is that I'm a relatively early hodler. I bought nearly all my Bitcoin at the start of 2015, and my cost basis was well under $300 a coin. So I have enough things to worry in my life, and I have kind of an alternate career where I'm kind of known and prominent. So it's like, just not having my identity put out because I am a hodler and because I'm kind of early to the game just makes sense from an operational security point of view, I think.
Yeah, it's amazing. I saw it also with some people like Gigi in Germany, where in the beginning he was normally on on meetups and everybody saw his face, but at some point he chose to be completely private with like his suit on and as we know
Yeah.
him. And I think different people choose different paths. Like what like for example, what can everybody do to like improve privacy? Like, in how much privacy is enough for like the person that maybe does not, who wants to get out there, who wants maybe even put the face on like the Bitcoin story, but still wants to protect your privacy? Like, do you have any recommendations for people like that? I mean, they cannot deny that they have Bitcoin, kind of. But do you have any recommendation for example, me?
In terms of establishing a little more privacy,
Yes.
while having your actual name out there, not really, because I think once your name is out there, it's you kind of have to go to some extreme lengths to lock things down. So it's I've been spending every day reading up on Bitcoin for well over 5 or 6 years before I felt called to do anything in the Bitcoin space. And, so by then, for me anyway, I kind of chewed on this for long enough that I realized that you kind of need to decide before you even start out. Are you going to put your name out there? I'm sure that it would take just a little bit of Googling based on the story you told me about Gigi for me to find his last name and to learn some, stuff about him, even though that's something he clearly doesn't want. And so, like, if you enter the public Bitcoin world as a pleb and you've divulged your first and last name, I think at that point it's kind of game over. But on the other hand, somebody like you, Robin, that's probably not that big of a deal because the likelihood of you becoming, comparably well known as people like Lynn Alden or Michael Saylor or Trace Mayer or Andreas Antonopoulos. I mean, the likelihood of that happening is probably very small. So you're very far down the line of, I think, having anything significant to worry about. But having said that, I think a little bit of operational security is always appropriate, even if you're kind of well known. I mean, I would never go out in public wearing a Bitcoin T-shirt. Are you kidding me? It just makes no sense at all. It's like you might as well go out in public with a target on your back, you know?
And the only Bitcoin merch I have are socks, and you can only see that they are Bitcoin socks if I put my jeans up. And the thing also I have is the Bitcoin hat, but I basically never wear it, so it's just there for for the YouTube video, and in public you never see that. And I mean, also, like, I think, as you said it, it's kind of, you go under the flow of Bitcoin influencers, because more and more people are coming up and speaking about Bitcoin, and there are more Bitcoin podcasts coming up. There are more Bitcoin posters, bloggers, vloggers, whatever, coming up, and you kind of are in a sea of people. But of course, if people really want to attack me, like, I have a lot of material online, they can really look into me, and they kind of find out stuff about me. But yeah, it's a risk I took, kind of intentionally,
Uh-huh.
because I wanted to get my name out there, and I wanted to associate myself also with Bitcoin. But yeah, it's something that we have to live with.
It would now I need to say that uh, I was pretty prominent in my regular lifetime career before I got into this, and I think part of why I was willing to be anonymous is I've had all the attention and all the pats on the back that a person needs for an entire lifetime. So I really didn't care about whether anybody recognized that uh, who I was or what I'd done in the world of Bitcoin, because I've already received so much attention for other things I've done in life. Um, the let's see the thing to be really focused on, I think, is just to realize that there's more people coming in, and there's a real disadvantage to working under a pseudonym or working anonymously. For me, it turned out to be much harder to get initial attention for my work. Because I was starting out as a complete unknown. I couldn't leverage my identity in my existing career, and so I kind of had to start from zero. I very much feel like had I had my Bitcoin basics essay, had I been able to come out with something like that in 2016, I would have become one of the better known people in Bitcoin. But the fact that I came out with it in 2023 and did it under a pseudonym, it has taken me an enormous amount of work to get a relatively small amount of attention. Even now, only about 4,000 people have read the piece, and if it weren't for Gigi, who was the first person to tweet about it, if it weren't for John Ballas, who was the first person to have me on a podcast, if it weren't for the Swan Bitcoin post people featuring me in their daily newsletter, if it weren't for those things, the that piece would have just been dead and died on the vine. So I am it worked out fine for me, to have done this under a pseudonym, but it took a whole lot of extra work to get this piece to have any attention. I'm really delighted, though, that even though it's only had about 4,000 views, it seems to have inspired a lot of passionate response. I mean, to the point that people have felt called to translate it into Spanish and into Italian and into French. So it's now in 4 languages, and that's without my even trying to make that happen. People just went out and did this because they felt like, the coverage for a Bitcoin introduction in those languages was insufficient, and so they felt called to translate my piece, which was really an immensely rewarding thing to have happened.
It's kind of the biggest compliment you can make. Like, oh, it's in English. I have to have it also in my local language to show it to my local community. This is beyond like the first compliment is like if someone reads it from front to back, like if the whole thing from zero to down the line, and then tweeting about it, sharing it, and then even translating. It's like kind of the biggest compliment you can make someone. um, how did you discover Bitcoin in like
Actually, the very end of 2014. And what was funny about it is when I first discovered it, the price of Bitcoin was around $325, and I was just sold. I wanted to put, you know, the overwhelming majority of my savings into Bitcoin, and I got a Coinbase account and I started putting orders in at the end of 2014. And what was really funny was that I put in this $5,000 order, for gosh, 13 or 14 coins, whatever, and I put the order in, and I'm like, okay, now I'm gonna own 14 Bitcoin, and I was like very excited. And the order was taken, and then like 3 or 4 days later, Coinbase would email me and said that the order had failed to go through, and I needed to try again. And meanwhile, the price of Bitcoin had dropped by $10. So I tried again, and another 3 or 4 days went by and it got rejected. But the price of Bitcoin had dropped another $10. And so by the time I was able to start placing orders, my I don't think I ever paid more than $300 for a coin, and it kept dropping. And over that month, um, I hate to say it, but I was running out of money. I had the last $5,000 or so left. And Bitcoin, one evening in January of 2015, had dropped like $35. It dropped all the way down to like $230. I spent the last of my money on this order. And that was the night that Bitcoin dropped all the way down to like $178. And by the time it was down there, I had already placed my order and I was out of money. I could have gotten a few more coins for the same amount of money had I only, had I only timed things perfectly. But I actually bought Bitcoin on the day where it went to like, I think it was a multi-year low by that point. And then very quickly it floundered back up. And then it stayed in the 220s for an entire year. Like it just was all of 2015. If you look at the chart, it essentially stayed between 220 and $230, which was like $40 less than my cost basis. So I was underwater with Bitcoin for an entire year. And I remember during that time, I met some guy who had bought in at $800 a coin, and he was totally bumming. I don't know what, I only met him, so I don't know if he had the fortitude to hold on. But I was underwater for well over a year. Um, but I knew what I had, and I really didn't care that I was underwater because, as far as I was concerned, um, Bitcoin was either going to fail and go to zero, or it was going to go to 10,000. Like 10,000 was like the city on a hill at that point. That was like the idea that Bitcoin could be $10,000. Like I was convinced that it could be, but I think that was as big as most people at that time could dare to dream. Anyhow, you asked me how I got into it, and I had been staying in. Uh, I have an old friend who's divorced and who lives in Hawaii, and at the time she had a couple of pre-adolescent children, and her kids were with their dad in California, and so she had her child's bedroom free. And so I said, hey, I really want to come back to Hawaii. I'd lived there for a while. So we worked out a deal that I'd pay her rent for a couple of months and sleep in her kid's room. And so one day I was uh, I was just in the mood to. I was hanging out. I was like, it's the middle of the afternoon. I'm slacking off, and I was in the mood to listen to podcasts, and this was like uh, Joe Rogan was by then one of the biggest podcasters, but he hadn't quite reached that, you know, enormity, the kind of fame he has today. But he was well known, and I liked his show. I'd been listening to it from the beginning, and I decided I'd listen to a Rogan podcast, and it had been a couple of months, so there are at least 12 episodes that he'd done since the last time I listened. So I looked at the roster of different names and, had, I mean, everybody from martial arts to music to comedians, trying to decide who am I going to listen to. And among the recent guests was this guy with this crazy name, Andreas Antonopoulos. Huh. What kind of name is that? Just the name kind of grabbed my attention, and I clicked on it, and it's like, oh wow, this is about Bitcoin. And I had known about Bitcoin for a few years by that point, because I'd been reading Slashdot in 2012, 2013. I definitely thought it was kind of a Beanie Baby novelty kind of thing, and I could see that it had the potential to get hot, and I had loosely followed it to $1,000, and then was really happy when it crashed because I figured maybe at some point I'll buy in. But I really did not understand in any kind of deep way how Bitcoin worked. I didn't understand proof of work. I didn't understand that it was based on public and private key encryption. I didn't understand, really the essentials of what Bitcoin was. And I certainly didn't understand the simplest and most important thing, that there was a fixed supply of 21 million coins. And during this podcast, Andreas, I think, masterfully explained some of the essentials, and luckily for me, I had just enough of a background in a bunch of disciplines that I feel like I connected the dots uh, right away. Like everything just snapped together for me, like a jigsaw puzzle. And so, really, by the end of that episode, uh, knowing the things that Andrea said, and having a background in some of these things, and knowing also that by this point I was around 50 years old, and I'd known that, I'd known about the national debt and fiat monetary systems for 30 years, and knew that it was all a house of cards. And all of a sudden, I'm like, wow, there is a new way of there is a new way of holding scarcity that is really pure, because hey, there's only 21 million coins. And I also have to say that I realized how early I still was. That even though Bitcoin was by this point a few $100s a coin, I could see right away that it was just as long as it didn't go to zero, it was insanely undervalued, because at this point, I'll just say one thing. There's 21 million coins, and at $300 a coin, uh, you could buy 1/1 millionth of the world's supply of Bitcoin. You could buy 21 coins for barely $6,000. Whereas at the time, I think gold was like $1,500 or something, and there's 6 billion pieces of gold, or there's 6 billion ounces of gold, above ground gold. So it's roughly 1 ounce per person around the world. So if you just do a comparison, uh, you could buy 1/1 millionth the supply of Bitcoin for barely 4 ounces of gold. It was just like, are you kidding me? Like how can Bitcoin be $300 when there's only 21 million pieces of this, whereas an ounce of gold and there's 7 billion pieces of gold is $1,500. Like I could see right away that it was just a matter of time that Bitcoin would be worth vastly more than an ounce of gold as long as it survived. And I figured, hey, it's 2015. Bitcoin's been around since 2009. It hasn't failed yet. It seems like it's resilient. I suppose it could implode, but I think I readily understood that all the times that Bitcoin was thought to have failed, Bitcoin itself had done exactly what it's supposed to do. What it failed was a bunch of Ponzi schemes and Mount Gox, which had nothing to do with Bitcoin itself. And I think that, things like that were pitfalls to other people understanding Bitcoin. I just had enough background of cryptography, of game theory, of economics, and just sort of critical thinking and common sense to just see through a bunch of the most common objections. And as I said, I think that Andreas offered such a masterful introduction to the topic that I kind of knew my way around enough to make a relatively informed decision that, hey, this is where I want to put the bulk of my assets. And so really I did a few more days of research after that podcast, listened to another one he had done earlier with Rogan, and by that point I was getting an account with Coinbase and getting started moving my savings out of dollars and into Bitcoin.
It's fascinating because you said that you have like an backgrounds in like in all those things that you need to understand Bitcoin, and you all also have been like 50 years old when you went into Bitcoin. How did you protect your savings before Bitcoin? Did you had a strategy before Bitcoin to counter the fiat monetary system and inflation? Did you wear in gold? Did you wear in stocks? What did you do before Bitcoin?
Uh, you know, the work that I've chosen to do in my life has never been lucrative. For a while, I was a tech writer, but I've just tried to do things in the world that I thought would make a difference. So to this day, uh, there's only been 1 year that I made more than $50,000. So I mean, that's from my work. Obviously, my Bitcoin investment has done very well. But as far as like earning money from my work, I have I I grew up very upper middle class, but after I left college, I uh, uh, really struggled sometimes. I mean, to the point that uh, for a number of years, to sort of save rent, I lived out of a minivan and traveled around the country and kind of enjoyed myself. And it was like, I suppose it was something like 50% homelessness and 50% just adventurous living. But I mean, there was definitely a poverty component to my decision making, and so I had done very well with my stock investments. I mean, so I'd been able to accumulate, uh, you know, tens of thousands of dollars, but that's not a heck of a lot of money when you're 50 years old. And I just, I think at the time uh, I felt like Bitcoin was either going to go to zero, or it would be a 50 or 100 to 1 return. and I thought the odds were that it was not going to fail. So uh, it just seemed to me like I won't say I YOLO'd into it. You only live once, whatever. I sort of did, and I sort of didn't. Because I thought that it was, uh, VJ has this in the bullish case for Bitcoin. He has this wonderful term, an asymmetric bet. And long before I discovered Bitcoin and heard that wonderful phrase, I'm sorry, long before I discovered his work and heard that wonderful phrase, an asymmetric bet. Uh, I may not have known the phrase, but I recognized right away that it was an asymmetric bet. That this was something that if it, as long as it didn't fail, there would be at least a 50-to-1 payoff. And so, given that that was the case, I figured, okay, well, I'm gonna just put what I have into this, and I saw the logic of it, and whether it went up 50% or down 50%, I didn't care. I was going to hodl this thing, and I was going to ride this thing either to zero or to the moon. And to this day, and it's now been 7 years. I have never parted with a single Satoshi.
I'm super excited to announce that this podcast just got the first ever sponsor. I just started the podcast out like 3 months ago, and now we have 21 Bitcoin as a partner for this podcast. 21 Bitcoin is Bitcoin only from day one, and they teach and preach self-custody. This is my go-to exchange when someone asks me, oh, where can I buy my Bitcoin from? This is the easiest entry for Bitcoiners. And if you want lower fees, plus at the same time support this podcast, use code Robin and click the link in the description. I had already 2 guests on that were before 2015 to 2014 in Bitcoin and started really early on with their Bitcoin journey. And they both said to me that they are now not buying anymore because they cannot they cannot fathom that they bought at like so low prices and now they have to pay such a huge amount, and they just like, are you still buying Bitcoin? Are you what is your kind of setup now with Bitcoin and buying and then holding on to it?
Well, I think I can give you a really good answer to that question, uh, and that stems from something I cover in my essay. There's an entire section in my Bitcoin Basics piece where I talk about the phrase "unit of account," and so the idea here is that like I'm in Japan right now, and let's just say Bitcoin did not exist. Let's just keep things really simple. Uh, it might be convenient for me to just shift all of my savings into Japanese yen because that's the only money I'm spending. But I know that the Japanese yen is likely to continue to depreciate against the dollar over time. So even though I'm only spending yen these days, to the extent that I have fiat currency, my unit of account is the dollar, and I keep most of my. I only go and get yen a few $100s at a time when I'm out of cash, and I try to have as few yen as possible. I try to never have more than a month or two's worth of Japanese yen on me when I live in Japan. In the same way, though, I also don't want to own dollars. And I try to keep my total amount of dollars between $5,000 and $10,000. I don't like to, I never want to have more than $10,000 because to me, my true unit of account, it's certainly not the Japanese yen, but it's also not the dollar. My unit of account is Bitcoin. So what I can tell you is uh, if your appearance fee for this podcast was $10,000, and I could expect a check in the mail tomorrow for $10,000 for having me on this podcast. You know what I would do with it, of course. I would cash it, and I would put all of that $10,000 into Bitcoin, because my unit of account is Bitcoin. If I get a windfall, some unexpected windfall, I'm still going to buy Bitcoin with it, because it's my unit of account. And I know that the dollar is and all the rest of the fiat currencies, like the cliche that the dollar is the cleanest shirt in a drawer full of dirty laundry. It is correct. The dollar is the best fiat currency out there, but it's still going to trend to zero, and that reality gets clearer every day. So it doesn't matter that my cost basis was under $300 a coin. My unit of account is Bitcoin. So anytime I get a windfall, it's going into Bitcoin. And I can continue this story because it always turns out to be a good move. A year and a half after I bought Bitcoin, Bitcoin had risen all the way to like $1,000, and I was lucky enough to get this really lucrative consulting gig that was going to pay $2,500 for just 3 days worth of work. I was like, okay, I'm not going to turn that down. That's the most money I've seen in years. So I took this gig, and I talked to the guy, and we were discussing Bitcoin, and I was really urging him to get some of it. And he said, well, do you want me to pay you for your consulting fee in Bitcoin? And I was like, yeah, of course I do. So what happened was, in 2.5 days or 3 days in 2016, I earned $2,500, which turned into 2.5 Bitcoin. So now, in hindsight, in 3 days, I had earned $100,000. So even though the price was triple what I bought my initial stash for, it sure turned out to be a good investment. And I think right now, like, there is, I personally think there's a lot of upside right now. I think this is where price is concerned. I feel pretty confident that we are at the start of a major bull market. I think there's that guy Fred something or other who's been talking about Bitcoin ETFs and the impact they're going to have. I'm forgetting his name, but I hope you can put it in the show notes. But he has a really extensive background in finance, and he's been talking about why the halvening is actually a relatively minor factor this time around compared to the eventual impact of these ETFs. And I think we're at a point where there is tremendous upside, and it seems like a lot of the conventional wisdom out there is that we're going to see $100,000 Bitcoin in the next year or so. And I don't really make price predictions, but I think we're on the brink of a really big run up. I mean, the only prediction that I really make, and certainly the only one I made in my essay, is that price is set on the margins, and we are going to have a supply shock with Bitcoin. And I think the ETF, and I think a supply shock is a lot like drinking a milkshake. You're sitting there with your straw, and you're contentedly sipping away, and every sip, it feels the same, it tastes the same, and you're sipping away, and then all of a sudden you take one more sip, and it's gone. It's gone. Your milkshake has suddenly run out. And I think that we're going to see that with Bitcoin, where all the trading deviants have gotten rid of the last of their coins, and there's always going to be Bitcoin available for sale, but there's not going to be anybody to speak of selling entire coins at anything like a reasonable price. And I think that when the supply shock hits, we're going to I felt this for years that we're going to see a $10,000 day, a $10,000 candle, where in one day the price of Bitcoin goes up 100 or 10 grand, and yeah, I would. Uh, if any of my close friends would like to bet a bottle of expensive scotch on that happening in the next 5 years, I would take that bet. So I think a supply shock is coming. I think that it's really important that people think about unit of account and to choose your unit of account consciously instead of just making it whatever currency is used in the country you were born in. I think that's a crazy way to decide your unit of account. That should be your decision, not based on where you were born. Uh, so yeah, I hope that's I'm kind of rambling a bit over several topics, but I hope this is responsive to some of what you're asking.
Yeah, that's amazing, and it covers so many topics. And you also mentioned the Bitcoin Basics articles, and this was basically the start of me contacting you to be on the podcast because I like the article a lot, and you probably also orange pilled a lot of people along the way, or at least you talked with a lot of people along the way. What is for you like the most effective way to explain someone Bitcoin? Like how uh, uh, it- how does it make click for people the fastest, or what do you have as an experience or in orange pilling people?
Okay, so I think I'm going to give you an unusual response to this question, and that is that well, it depends on your level of expertise. Like I think somebody like uh, Andreas Antonopoulos, somebody like Preston Pish, uh, somebody like Marty Bent uh, could, if they were sitting next to somebody on an airplane and had a couple of hours to just do a back and forth, they could get into any topic that the person brought up and just give a personalized introduction. That would be really effective. I'd like to think that I could do that too, but the truth is that I think that since Bitcoin is so profoundly multidisciplinary, if you have the technical skills, you might not have the economic understanding. If you have the economic understanding, you might not have the communication ability to sort of dumb it down and say it in more accessible terms. So it really, even Satoshi himself, herself, itself once said that once complained that, hey, it's really hard to introduce somebody to Bitcoin because I have nothing to compare it to. So if somebody is as brilliant as Satoshi had trouble introducing Bitcoin, I just want to say to most of your listeners, you know, hey, what chance do you have? I mean, maybe you can, maybe you have some gifts there, but probably most people don't. So what I would suggest is instead of trying to uh, trying to orange pill somebody through a series of uh, through covering all these basic topics. Instead, what makes more sense is to just use your social capital. Hey Robin, I've known you since high school. We've been friends for a long time. You know that I've done this, and this right. You need to listen to me here. It is worth investing 5 or 10 hours of your time into Bitcoin, and go and read this or go and watch this. But please, we've been friends for this long, and just take my word for it. The very best thing you could do over the next week is to give Bitcoin 5 hours of your time. Oh, here's a really good article. And, I would hope that some of your listeners, after they read my Bitcoin basics piece, will make my article their default recommendation. But, my Bitcoin basics piece uh, is something you could read in a sitting, but it took me about 6 weeks to write. It is very, very difficult to lay out all of these complicated topics in a really simple way, and also to choose what gets left in and what gets left out. And let me just say, if you're talking to your grandma about the block reward, you're going over her head, probably. Your grandma may have attended MIT as a computer engineer, so who knows? But it's just really easy to get too technical when you're talking to people, and I think that rather than try to, I think that for most people, it's a mistake for them to try to explain Bitcoin, because even if you do understand it, you may not be able to explain it well. And I think very few people understand uh, all the essential topics well enough to explain them sufficiently and accurately, and to also know what things are not worth getting into. So in my Bitcoin basics piece, I made those hard choices about what to leave in and what to leave out. And yeah, I'd be really happy if more people adopted that as their default recommendation. But whether you do or not, I feel strongly that the best strategy is to not try is for most people to never really try to go into the details about Bitcoin with anybody, but instead to figure out what is my default recommendation for the best thing to read or to watch, whether it's a book or a YouTube video or an article, whatever it is. Figure out the thing you're most comfortable recommending, and then just to orange pill somebody, just say, hey, Bitcoin is incredibly cool. It's incredibly important. It is the most important technology of our lifetimes, perhaps. And there's really no better use of the next 5 or 10 hours of your time to learn the very basics as quickly as possible. Please go and read this. Please go and watch this, and just leave it at that.
I think it's a great way, because I have my name out there. I'm on social media. All my friends, my family, they all know I'm the Bitcoin guy in the family. I'm the Bitcoin guy in the friend circle. Even though like most of my closer friends are also like have an Bitcoin standard adopted. Like some of them are even 100% in, like me. But um, I observed that it's best to, like, in the beginning I really wanted to orange pill everybody. I was like talking with everybody. I think this is the urge that everybody has, especially in the beginning when they first get Bitcoin, kind of. And then I discovered that Bitcoin is coming no matter what I do. Like Bitcoin does not meet me in the sense. And so I was just putting my stuff out there on the internet, and putting it publicly available for everybody. And in real life, I don't bring Bitcoin up. I wait till someone brings Bitcoin up. It usually happens. It happens now more than in 1 year ago. And then if someone is interested, then we can, then I talk about Bitcoin. So my orange pilling advice is always orange pill someone that is interested in it. If he isn't interested, it's hard to start the interest in him. Like people maybe can do it. Like people are maybe really good educators and good communicators. I tried it. I failed with some. I succeeded with some, but I usually just wait till interest is there, and then I welcome them with open arms and try to guide them. Oh, there's a good article, there's a good podcast, there's a good book you can read, and if you're interested in that and that, it also depends like what his knowledge is. Like some are having the
Yeah.
economical side because they're like a gold bug. It was kind of the
Yeah.
thing with my dad. He already understood gold, so he needed more the technical side of it. So that's always interesting to see someone getting into Bitcoin and how they are getting into it. What I also see with people getting into Bitcoin is people are getting distracted by altcoins or shitcoins, I refer to them. Did you get distracted by it, or why do you think people are getting distracted by it? For me, the same thing is with leverage. People are like, "Oh, I have Bitcoin, but I want to have like a big credit also now with Bitcoin," and they're getting 20x leverage all of the sudden. What's your whole thoughts on this?
Well, I cover leverage in the piece in my Bitcoin basics piece, and I basically say don't do it. And I I think I quoted Caitlin Long in my essay uh, where she says like the quickest way for a fool and his Bitcoin to be parted is leverage. But as for shitcoins, I kind of fell into that trap in 2017, and that was during the. But I think I had a better excuse than anyone would have now. The block wars were happening. Secondary layers like Litecoin really hadn't been fleshed out, or I'm sorry, Lightning Network hadn't been fleshed out, and I could see that, and I should say that I received the fork split of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin Cash. Like this was something everybody received uh, when Bitcoin Cash came out, and to me, this was like this really unwanted distraction because I wasn't sure which of the forks would win, and I was like, it just seemed like it was just kind of felt like, from what I could determine, Roger Ver was not very bright and not and he didn't strike me as terribly ethical. And suddenly I had this coin that he and his cronies had created that I didn't want, but I was afraid to sell because maybe it wins out over Bitcoin. I got rid of some of my Bitcoin Cash, and I felt like Litecoin was a better choice than Bitcoin Cash for maybe good reasons. Uh, I basically sold some of my Bitcoin Cash and bought some Litecoin with it. I never spent any of my real money on this. In hindsight, I wish I'd never purchased that Litecoin. I wish I'd just gone and plunged that money into purchasing more Bitcoin because I would have been way, way, way ahead. Like had I done that, any Bitcoin I purchased would have jumped 6 times, whereas the Litecoin that I stupidly purchased fell by 50%. And but whatever. That was probably my biggest mistake in Bitcoin. But I never spent any of my own money on Litecoin. I regret buying it, and I certainly have never promoted it. And I end my essay by acknowledging that I own some and saying that it was a horrible mistake. And yeah, so I'm very anti shitcoin, but I think to people who are kind of intermediate Bitcoiners, uh, who have a moderate amount of knowledge of Bitcoin, the the altcoin argument was vastly stronger in 2017 during the block size wars than it is today. Like today, we have the second layer solutions, and there's just no reason for any altcoin out there. The only thing I can think you can make any kind of case for is stable coins, which have true utility. but then you always have to wonder, are they really backed like they're supposed to be? Like I don't think there's any way to argue that stable coins do have a use case, especially for people in countries that have deflation. Um, but as to all those other altcoins, I hate them all. I think that they're a cancer on Bitcoin. And one of my greatest joys over the past year has been looking at the 12-month Bitcoin versus Ethereum chart and just watching Ethereum grind ever lower as Vitalik and his cronies try to come up with some shiny new use case for this coin that's in free fall. Um, like as I said, as we said at the start of the show, Bitcoin really points out the people who lack a moral compass, and nobody lacks a moral compass more so than the people who've pre-mined shitcoins and are promoting them to enrich themselves. So I love to see those people fail.
it's a beautiful way to say it. For me, I also went into altcoins, and for me was the block size war really important also in Bitcoin histories, and in the whole progress of Bitcoin becoming more resilient also. How important do you think was the block size war in the Bitcoin history, and how did it uh, guided Bitcoin through the resilient thing it is now, or was it resilient also before, but it just was kind of a thing that it has had to prove?
I think the I mean, I know that there's one prominent book that's devoted to the block size wars that's supposed to be excellent. I forget the title of the book, and I even forget the person who wrote it. But no doubt I mean, this is not my area of expertise by a long shot. I don't know as much about the block size war as I should because I don't I don't understand the technical underpinnings of Bitcoin as deeply as I should. Like, I really can't even tell you in any honest, clear way what SegWit does, or I know that it's part of what grew out of the block size wars, but there's just a lot of technical things that I'm not that interested in and that go over my head. But I think in my understanding of the block size wars, the most important thing to come out of it was the fork split and the launch of Bitcoin Cash, and then the later launch of BSV, Satoshi's vision, and watching these two coins pirate the Bitcoin name and claim to be the real Bitcoin, and watching what was it, Bitcoin.com promoting Bitcoin Cash as being the real Bitcoin in this really sneaky, slimy way. I forget if it was bitcoin.org or bitcoin.com, but there was just what was done on one of those sites was just beyond the pale in terms of lacking integrity, basically tricking people into thinking that Bitcoin Cash, Bcash, was the real Bitcoin. But I think that was um, that was the um, in some ways the great attack on Bitcoin in terms of what we could ever hope to see in terms of a fork split and so forth. And just watching what happened both to Bcash and to BSV over the next several years. I mean, there was a time, I think there was a week where Bcash was selling for about half the price of Bitcoin. And for at least a year, I think for a couple of years, you could sell 6 Bcashes and get a Bitcoin. Like it stayed as a very substantial portion of Bitcoin's value for quite a while, and and I think that was largely because there were a lot of people like me out there who wasn't who weren't technically skilled enough to be 100% sure that Bcash would go down in flames. And I think as the years passed and Bcash ground ever lower, I mean that is a really satisfying chart to look at as well. Um, I definitely have this Schadenfreude element of my personality where I just wish doom and destruction, and I hope all these altcoins die in a fire, and I just like watching them implode by one because I just don't have any respect or mercy towards these shitcoins. But yeah, I think Bcash and BSV were an unprecedented form of attack on Bitcoin that we will never see on that scale again. I think there will be other attacks that I can't even begin to predict. But watching how Bitcoin disemboweled these two competitors uh, is at once immensely satisfying and immensely encouraging and instructive.
Yeah, the chart of especially Bcash, and I use sometimes when, like in my replies, there's sometimes actually people that still really heavily believe in those coins, and then it just strikes me how someone can actually believe in that stories, and it's still standing behind those coins, even though it's so, like in 2017 it's more understandable, but now there's so much
Yeah,
education on it. There are like so many also Bitcoin only podcasts, Bitcoin only education pieces that really break it down why, and not just saying it, like really deeply breaking it down. And also like just a pure free market over the last years, like the chart is like it's not even a close thing. Like it's for me really interesting to see that people are still believing and hanging on to it so heavily. But
yeah.
I think,
But
as you said,
but
yeah.
but one thing I want to add also on top of all of that is that uh, the emergence, the launch of Bcash, when that happened, that was really before the rise of Bitcoin Twitter. At that point, the biggest online way to where all the Bitcoiners would communicate was the main Bitcoin forum on Reddit, and that ended up getting taken over by the Bcashers. So like if you were relatively new to the Bitcoin space and kind of only intermediate, you would the bulk of the information you would be seeing about Bitcoin versus Bcash would be leading in the Bcash direction. And you were essentially getting propagandized by the dominant forum channel on Reddit. And so it made I'm just glad there were people like Matt Odell out there uh, who were being so direct and succinct and straightforward about why Bcash was just an imposter coin and why it was destined to fail. I definitely uh, want to buy Matt Odell the drink of his choice at some point if I'm ever lucky enough to meet him. And there's other people, of course. I think Trace Mayer was really famous at that time for just kind of gloating about how anytime there was a fork split with Bitcoin, he would just sell the fork split and buy more Bitcoin. And, so there's people who saw through the shitcoinery even before the block size wars and were consistent all the way through. But I will not say that in 2017, my knowledge was sufficient to really spot this, and it took an extra year or so before I could really look at Bcash and just feel in my bones that this coin had no future and was just going to grind down to zero. And it has. I mean, but it was not until 2017, I guess, that I sold the last of my Bitcoin Cash. So
Yeah,
um,
it kind of speaks to the strength of Bitcoin, that it went through that period. And it was so many misinformations out there. There was so many, as you said, Bitcoin Reddit was taken over by the Pcash. I just don't know about that time because I came into
Yeah.
Bitcoin way later. That speaks to the strength of the monetary system, basically, for me. We are having an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest asks the question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And if you and your question is, do you think circular economies are important for adoption, and why not?
Nah, I don't think so at all. Yeah, that's a hard no. I mean, it's nice in theory or whatever, I guess, but that's going to happen by itself when the time is right. There's going to be technical advances. I mean, for Bitcoin, I mean, what matters now is is how good is Bitcoin at being a store of value. Now, I mean, if we're talking about countries like Venezuela and countries in Africa where the currency is just collapsing, then yeah, I mean, as a day-to-day spending method, then Bitcoin becomes truly important. But I mean, for people in developed countries where the currencies are stable week to week. It's frankly not a problem. And, the way I have no doubt that if you and I go out for a beer in 10 years, uh, I'll be able to whip out my phone and use this really cushy, excellent wallet and just pay for my beer at any bar we go to. Like that will happen. But I think the thing that I see happening is that at some point, like Apple uses Apple introduces like its own Bitcoin wallet with some kind of secure element built into this in a way that grandma can use, and Bitcoin at that point is going to have its Hotmail and AOL CD moment. I think you may be too young to remember when the internet really took off in the late 1990s, but it all happened one year. And that was like AOL, America Online, got really huge out of nowhere. And this was like when people subscribed to magazines. And this one year, anytime a magazine came in the mail, there'd be a CD in it. And this CD-ROM was to get you onto AOL, to get you onto America Online. And so like these discs were everywhere. AOL just blanketed the country, and everybody had at least 5 AOL discs. You couldn't, every time you turned around, you'd have a new AOL disc in your latest magazine or whatever. And so like the on ramp to, and granted, it was shitty dial up internet or whatever, but you were on the internet and AOL got you on, and you were using a web browser, and that's everything was you know something that your grandmother could do and get on the internet. And then about a year or two later, um, Hotmail came out. And this was before it got purchased by Microsoft. And for the first time, somebody just using a standard web browser could get a free email address. They didn't have to log into Unix and fire up Pine, the Pine client or through the command line interface. They could just open up a web page, go to hotmail.com and have their free email account. And yeah, I mean, Gmail turned out to be 10 times better eventually, but Hotmail was the first web-based email solution that was good enough. And suddenly you didn't have to be some Dungeons and Dragons, computer science, 17-year-old nerd to be on the internet. You could be just a regular person. And I think that in terms of your ability to walk around with a couple $100 worth of Bitcoin on your phone. I mean, I know there's wallets that can do that now, and I know it can be done, but I think that Bitcoin is going to have like a Hotmail moment, an AOL moment, where Apple, like its biggest introduction for the iPhone in 2020X is that it's going to be a Bitcoin enabled iPhone that is that inspires the same kind of confidence as a cold card because of breakthroughs in security and ease of use. And at that point, we can talk about circular economies and so forth. But for now, it's like much more important than circular economy. Regular people to lock down some of their net worth into Bitcoin and to start thinking of Bitcoin as their unit of account. That's getting easier by the day. And every month, more and more people are shifting away from their fiat currency to Bitcoin as their unit of account. And does it really matter whether the next beer that I buy you, I'm paying Bitcoin for it if both of us have 85% of our wealth stored in Bitcoin? Who cares about, the other 5% of currency or whatever? Who cares about how we're making payments? I mean, I'm not dismissing it totally, but I'm saying that it's a problem that will solve itself.
So it's just coming eventually, and we don't have to force it on. That's I think a really good way on looking at it. Where can people, if they want to get in touch with you, best find you? And yeah, where can people get in touch with you?
The best thing is just the front page of my website. It has links to my article, to my Twitter account, to my email address, and my website is D as in Donald, N as in Nottingham, comply, dncomply.com. And yeah, that's definitely the best way to. I even have a Nostr account, and yeah, I got all that stuff. And so that's the best place to find me.
Thank you for being on.
Sure thing. Were you going to ask me a question for your next guest? Have you forgotten that?
Yeah, I will ask you, but usually I do it after the podcast.
Okay, good. Okay, that takes some of the pressure off of me. You
Yeah.
just said that you do that, so I wanted to make sure you hadn't forgotten. So,
Yeah.
well, very cool. I've really enjoyed our conversation, Robin.